"We don't just hand out that kind of money to people like you," said Sabrina Holt, her tone icy and clipped as she slid the withdrawal slip back across the polished counter. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to turn a few heads in the bank's marble lobby. Without even glancing up, she continued tapping her manicured nails, visibly impatient. Danielle Avery stood in silence, unfazed. She wore a soft beige hoodie, dark slacks, and white sneakers. Her curls were neatly pulled into a high bun, tucked beneath a black felt fedora. A modest leather satchel hung from her shoulder. Her presence was calm, composed, yet somehow too unfamiliar, too out of place for Sabrina's comfort. Danielle quietly pushed the slip back toward her, along with her ID and a matte black card labeled in crisp silver. Founder level. "I'd like to proceed with my transaction," she said evenly. Beth, the teller beside Sabrina, leaned toward Mark Doyle, whispering something. Mark raised an eyebrow in Danielle's direction, unimpressed. No one in this branch recognized the woman before them. Not as a CEO, not as their boss, not as the very person who once worked behind this very counter 2 decades earlier. "Is there a problem?" Danielle asked. Sabrina finally looked up. Her expression didn't shift. "That's a large amount," she said. "We've seen some suspicious activity lately. You understand, right?" Danielle replied with quiet firmness. "I understand protocols. I've submitted all requirements. This is my account." But Sabrina just stared at her. No matter the documentation, it was clear. Danielle's real offense was simply not looking the part. "And before we continue, I want to ask you, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels." Danielle had been waiting for 37 minutes. Not that anyone was counting, except she was. Every second ticked louder than the polished clock mounted above the teller windows. She had arrived early, taken a seat quietly, and watched as customer after customer walked in after her and were helped immediately. A white man in a business suit had barely stepped inside before a teller rushed to greet him with a smile. A young woman with a blonde ponytail was waved over with friendly chatter. But Danielle, she had been overlooked twice. She had chosen this branch intentionally, not just because it was the flagship downtown location of Union West Bank, but because this was where it all began. Her first job, her first loan approval, the place she spent late nights as a young trainee, back when she still wore a stiff name tag and memorized banking codes after hours. This lobby had once felt like home, but not today. Today she was a stranger in the house she helped build. When her number was finally called, she approached the counter with calm confidence. Her withdrawal form was precise, her ID was current, and her black card with silver embossed letters, founder level, was the highest level in the bank system, reserved only for 3 clients in the entire institution. She placed everything on the counter in a tidy stack, her movements measured and respectful. Beth, the teller, glanced at the form and froze slightly. Her eyes scanned the amount. $125,000. Her expression shifted from neutral to guarded. She looked over Danielle's ID, then to her face, then back at the ID again. "That's quite a large withdrawal," she murmured. Danielle nodded politely. "It's within my account limits." Instead of processing the request, Beth glanced over at Mark Doyle, who was seated at a nearby desk. He walked over without a word and loomed behind Beth, his arms folded across his chest. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, not looking at Beth, but directly at Danielle. "No," Danielle replied. Just a standard withdrawal. My documents are in order." Mark didn't touch the card or the ID. Instead, he tilted his head. "We've had some suspicious transactions recently, a few fraud cases involving fake accounts. You can't be too careful." Danielle stayed composed. "This is not a fake account. I've been a customer here for over 20 years. Before Mark could respond, Sabrina Holt approached. Her heels clicked confidently across the floor, and her navy blue blazer was buttoned just tight enough to signal authority. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't ask Danielle her name. Instead, she picked up the withdrawal slip, her fingers barely touching the edge of it. "May I ask what this money is for?" she asked. Danielle's brow lifted slightly. "Is that a standard question?" Sabrina gave a short, humorless laugh. "Well, sometimes people come into sudden money, a lawsuit settlement, a lottery win. You'd be surprised." Mark chuckled quietly behind her. Danielle didn't flinch. This is my money, earned, not stumbled upon. Beth looked away, clearly uncomfortable. Her hands fidgeted with a stack of deposit slips that didn't need straightening. Danielle noticed the way her eyes darted around, looking for someone to intervene. But no one did. Behind her, a few customers had started to watch the interaction unfold. A middle-aged white woman in a cardigan had paused mid-withdrawal. A man in a gray overcoat slowly lowered his phone, pretending to read a message while staring directly at the counter. Danielle felt the weight of it all, the scrutiny, the subtle distrust, the assumption that she needed to justify her presence. And yet she stood firm. This was not new. It was simply more bitter because it came from the very institution she had once helped rise. She took a breath and looked Sabrina in the eye. If there are genuine concerns about my credentials, I'm happy to speak with someone who has the authority to resolve this properly. Sabrina tilted her head, still smiling. I am the authority in this branch. Danielle's gaze didn't waver. Then I hope you know exactly what you're doing. Danielle's calm demeanor was met with silence. Sabrina stood still, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter, as if weighing whether Danielle's presence was worth the time. Then, without warning, she turned to Mark and said flatly, "Call security." Her words were crisp, not loud, not panicked, just final. Danielle didn't move. She blinked once, slowly, then turned her head slightly as Mark reached for the phone on the side wall. Beth's hand paused mid-keystroke. Her eyes darted to Danielle, then to Sabrina, then back to her screen. She looked as though she might say something, anything, but no words came. Across the lobby, a tall man in a gray suit and scarf looked up from his tablet. He lowered his device, watching. Sabrina didn't bother with another explanation. "This transaction has been flagged for irregularity," she said. "We are within our rights to escalate the matter." Her voice was dry, like she'd said it 100 times before. But everyone could tell she hadn't. This wasn't a policy line. It was a personal judgment, wrapped in protocol to shield her from accountability. Danielle remained steady. "I've done nothing irregular. I've provided all identification, and my account is valid. Are you accusing me of something specific?" Sabrina offered no response. She simply gestured to the security camera in the corner and said, "You're being recorded." Danielle glanced up calmly. "Yes, I know. I helped approve those cameras." That made Sabrina's expression flicker for the first time. But before anyone could speak, a voice rose from behind the waiting chairs. "Excuse me, sorry, but is that Danielle Avery?" All heads turned. An older black man in a postal uniform stood halfway between the seating area and the teller line. His face was lined with age, his eyes kind, and his voice carried quiet certainty. "Danielle Avery," he repeated, louder this time. "You're the one who saved the Westfield Credit Union back in 2009, aren't you? I remember your name. I read the article. You used to be a regional manager at Union West, right here in this district." The room froze. Sabrina's mouth opened slightly, then shut again. Danielle turned to the man and gave him a soft, tired smile. "Yes, that was a long time ago." The man nodded slowly, clearly putting the pieces together. "And now, you're standing in line like you're nobody." Danielle didn't answer, but her expression said everything. Sabrina interrupted quickly. "Sir, please return to your seat. This is a private banking matter." But the damage was already done. The tension had shifted. The staff was now not only unsure, they were exposed. Mark hung up the phone without dialing. Beth was staring at the floor. One of the junior tellers in the back whispered something under her breath. Danielle heard the word unbelievable. Sabrina, visibly irritated by the loss of control, leaned forward again. "We can refer you to one of our alternate partner locations if this branch is not meeting your needs." Danielle responded gently but firmly. "This branch used to be the standard. It used to be mine." Then she reached slowly into her bag, not for documents, not for a phone, but for composure. Because it was clear now, she wasn't just being denied a withdrawal, she was being erased. The silence in the lobby stretched, brittle and unbearable. Danielle stood tall, unflinching, though her stomach tightened with every glance thrown her way. She had been here before, this kind of moment, where a person's worth was silently debated by those in positions of false authority. But never this blatantly, never from her own people, in her own system. Beth shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a stack of documents she didn't need to touch. Mark remained standing behind her like a statue, his posture stiff, defensive. Sabrina crossed her arms as if bracing herself for a response that never came. Then came the voice, soft, measured, but unmistakably firm. "I believe there's been a mistake here." It came from the other end of the counter. An elderly white man stepped forward, slowly but steadily, his leather wallet still open in one hand. He wore a tan trench coat and a blue scarf, and his glasses hung low on his nose. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, addressing the room more than anyone in particular. "But I've been a client of Union West for over 30 years, and I happen to recognize this woman." Danielle blinked, slightly startled. She didn't recognize the man, but his tone was not performative. It was precise, direct. "I met Miss Avery once," he continued, "at a business development luncheon downtown, nearly 10 years ago. She spoke about equitable banking access, and I remember thinking, finally someone who understands both sides of the counter. Someone who started as a teller and rose up through the ranks without forgetting where she came from." Sabrina's expression hardened. "Sir, please return to your business. This matter is under control." But the man ignored her. "I've also had the privilege of reading her internal memos," he added, now speaking directly to the rest of the customers. "They circulate in our quarterly stakeholder updates. She's not just a leader. She's the reason this bank's reputation survived the last recession." Several customers exchanged glances. One woman in a red coat leaned slightly forward. Even Beth looked up, visibly shaken. Danielle stayed silent, stunned by the man's unexpected clarity. Sabrina pressed on. "This is irrelevant to the current verification process." "No," he cut in sharply. "What's irrelevant is the way your team is treating a client who outranks every one of you. I've seen founders dressed like billionaires, and I've seen billionaires dressed like ordinary citizens. You think power always walks in wearing cufflinks? You're wrong." He turned to Danielle and nodded respectfully. "Whatever you need today, Miss Avery, you should get it, immediately." Sabrina opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, another voice entered the fray. "Excuse me," a young woman from the back of the lobby called out. She stepped forward holding a phone. "Is it true? Are you really Danielle Avery, the one who launched the Equitrust initiative?" Danielle gave a slow nod. "Yes, I am." The woman blinked. "My brother applied for a small business loan through your program. He never got approved anywhere else, but yours gave him a chance. He started a mechanic shop last year. He's doing well." For the first time, Sabrina said nothing. Danielle looked around. What had started as humiliation was becoming revelation. The staff had seen a hoodie, a quiet tone, and assumed weakness. The clients were beginning to see something entirely different. This wasn't just about one transaction anymore. It was about truth being louder than assumptions. Beth stared at the founder-level card again, the sleek black surface catching the ceiling light. She had seen this type of card only once before, during onboarding training, when they explained the bank's elite tier for institutional-level clients. It wasn't just rare, it was personal, issued only by approval of the executive team, and right now it was sitting in front of her, attached to the name Danielle Avery. She swallowed hard. Mark leaned over slightly, still trying to maintain control. "Cards can be stolen," he said dismissively. "I've seen people pull stunts like this before. High-end fake IDs, name-dropping, acting entitled." Sabrina nodded slowly, gripping the edge of the counter. "We're going to need to verify her identity with corporate before we release anything." Danielle's voice remained calm, but there was now a distinct weight behind her words. "You've had my ID, my signature card, and my account details for over 20 minutes. At what point does this stop being about protocol and start being personal?" There was no answer. The old man in the trench coat spoke again. "Or maybe it already is." Danielle didn't turn to face him. She was now focused solely on Sabrina. "Tell me something," Danielle said, steady and clear. "If a white man in a tailored suit had handed you this same card with this same withdrawal request, would you have sent for security?" Sabrina faltered for half a second. "That's not a fair question." "It is," Danielle replied. "It's just not a comfortable one." Beth's hands were frozen over the keyboard now. Her eyes darted between Sabrina and Danielle. She was starting to understand. Danielle slowly reached into her satchel and pulled out a second item, a slim, leather-bound folder. She opened it deliberately, revealing a corporate badge with her name, photo, and the title, President and CEO, Union West Bank. It was not theatrical, it was surgical. The silence was instant, clean, and absolute. Sabrina blinked hard. Mark's arms slowly fell to his sides. Beth let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Danielle laid the badge gently on top of the counter. You didn't recognize me because you weren't looking. And when I gave you every chance to correct that, you chose to escalate instead. Across the lobby, phones were now out. Not filming, just silently raised, forgotten in open hands, as if their owners had suddenly realized they were witnessing something historic. Danielle continued, I came here today not just as your CEO, but as your test, and you failed. Mark stepped back a few inches. Sabrina didn't move. Her jaw tightened. I've worked in this bank longer than some of you have had careers, Danielle added, from trainee to regional director to COO. Every step earned, every obstacle faced, and yet in 20 minutes you stripped that down to a hoodie and a question mark. For the first time Beth spoke. Her voice was small but shaking. Ms. Avery, I'm sorry. Danielle turned to her, and though her expression was unreadable, there was no rage. You looked away when it mattered, but at least you knew it was wrong. That matters. And just like that, the balance of power in the lobby shifted, not with shouting, not with threat, but with clarity. The lobby's air shifted again when the glass doors swung open with a hiss and a quiet click. Danielle didn't need to turn around. She knew that sound. So did everyone else who had worked in the system long enough to fear it. It was the sound of someone from the executive floor arriving without warning. The woman who entered wore a crisp navy pantsuit in a stern expression. Her heels clacked against the marble tiles as she moved forward, not rushing, but with unmistakable purpose. Her name tag, visible to anyone watching, read, Jenna Clark, Internal Audit Supervisor. Sabrina stiffened. Mark's face paled. Beth instinctively stepped back. Danielle simply folded her hands in front of her and waited. Jenna did not greet anyone. She walked straight to the center of the lobby and stopped between Danielle and the teller counter. She took a quick glance at the ID on the counter, the founder level card, and the leather badge that clearly bore Danielle's name and title. Then she looked up at Sabrina. I received a message flagged through the internal review system 20 minutes ago, Jenna said, her voice level but cool. It appears this branch initiated a Level 2 identity escalation against the bank's CEO. Sabrina opened her mouth, then closed it again. Mark stepped forward. We were following verification protocols, he said quickly. We've seen impersonation attempts. She came in without any prior appointment. She, Jenna interrupted sharply, is your employer. The quiet that followed was unlike anything the branch had experienced before. Not even the air vents dared to hum. Jenna turned her attention to Beth. Tell her, Beth McKay, did you question the authenticity of the documents presented? Beth swallowed hard. No, ma'am. I followed procedure, but I hesitated. I didn't act. Jenna nodded once, her tone softening ever so slightly. That much I saw. You'll be included in the report, but you'll also be given the opportunity to respond. She looked back at Danielle. Ms. Avery, would you like to file your own observation now, or shall we proceed directly to documentation? Danielle shook her head. Let's finish this where it started. Here, with them. Jenna stepped aside. Danielle took a step forward. I came to this branch because I needed to see the culture firsthand, she began. We've been hearing things, stories that didn't match the polished performance reports this team has been submitting. Her voice remained calm but unmistakably cutting. Today I was spoken down to, doubted, profiled, and nearly removed by force, not because of any breach in policy, but because I walked in dressed like an everyday citizen, because I chose not to announce myself, because someone looked at me and saw inconvenience, not leadership. She turned her gaze to Sabrina. You didn't fail a protocol, you failed a principle. Sabrina looked down, but the words had already landed. Danielle looked to Jenna. You'll need to stay for full audit procedures. I'd like a full compliance sweep of this branch by end of week. I suspect what happened today wasn't an isolated event. Jenna nodded and immediately began making notes on her tablet. Danielle took one last look around the lobby. The customers, the employees, the walls she once helped paint. Then she turned back to the counter and said quietly, "I will withdraw the amount now, $125,000 from my account, as is my right." And with that, the room exhaled. Not in relief, but in realization. The test was over, and the lesson had begun. Beth processed the withdrawal with trembling fingers. Every keystroke felt like it echoed across the marble walls. No one in the lobby spoke. Danielle stood in composed silence as the cash was counted, verified, and stacked neatly in front of her. She didn't watch the money, she watched the people. Sabrina hadn't said a word since Jenna's arrival. Her arms were now crossed tightly across her chest, as if holding herself together. Mark had retreated to the manager's desk and was pretending to type, but the screen in front of him was black. Beth looked like she was trying not to cry. Danielle reached out, gently placing her hand over the stack of bills, signaling the end of the transaction. "Thank you," she said calmly. "Please be sure this withdrawal is reflected in the client ledger before closing today. I want no discrepancies." Beth nodded. "Yes, Ms. Avery." Danielle turned toward the center of the room. "Before I leave, I want to make something clear. What happened today won't be buried. Not in performance reports, not in quarterly summaries, not behind polished statements." Her gaze landed squarely on Sabrina. "And not in silence." At that moment, one of the junior staff members, Jenna, the same woman who had whispered "unbelievable" earlier, stood up from her workstation and took a step forward. She looked young, mid-20s with nervous energy in her posture, but her voice didn't shake. "Miss Avery, I'm sorry," she said quietly. Danielle looked at her. "For what?" Jenna took a breath. "Not just for today, for the way things have been here. There are internal messages from management, ones that tell us to vet certain profiles more carefully. We were never told directly to discriminate, but we got the message. And her voice cracked slightly, I didn't know how to speak up without risking my job." Danielle didn't respond right away. She studied Jenna's face, then glanced at Jenna Clark from Internal Audit, who had already begun typing furiously into her report. "Did you keep any of those messages?" Danielle asked. Jenna nodded. "I sent them to myself, and today, just now, I forwarded them to the audit office." Jenna Clark looked up. "They came through a few minutes ago. I flagged them for immediate escalation." Danielle gave a small nod. "Then you've done more than most. Thank you." Beth, still at the counter, looked over. "Ms. Avery, if I had said something earlier, if I had stepped in, would it have changed anything?" Danielle turned to her. "It would have mattered, but what matters more is what you do now." Silence returned to the branch, but it wasn't the tense silence from before. It was quieter, heavier, reflective. Danielle gathered her cash and returned it to her satchel. Then she stepped to the center of the lobby and faced the staff once more. "There will be changes, and not just because of me, but because this system was never meant to protect only those who look a certain way or speak with a certain tone. It must work for everyone, or it works for no one." She turned toward the exit, pausing for only a moment. "I'll see you all again, and when I do, I expect better." And with that, she walked out, not as a customer dismissed, but as a leader returned. The calm didn't last long. Less than 15 minutes after Danielle exited the branch, the atmosphere shifted once more. But this time, it was from the outside in. A black executive sedan pulled up to the curb. Its doors opened in near-perfect synchronicity, and out stepped three individuals who needed no introduction to anyone in the Union West Bank system: Chairman Matthew Lang, Board Member Rosalind Peters, and Compliance Chief Greg Yamada. All three were dressed not for ceremony, but for swift, serious action. They entered the branch without speaking to anyone, their faces set in grim focus. Inside, the staff instinctively straightened up. Sabrina looked as though she might be physically ill. Mark stood, eyes darting between the doors in his own desk, as if calculating escape. Beth backed away from the counter and folded her hands tightly in front of her. Greg Yamada was the first to speak. "We've seen the live audit feed, we've heard the real-time reports, and we've reviewed the security footage from this morning." Matthew Lang nodded toward Jenna Clark, who handed him a tablet. On its screen was a pause-still image. Danielle Avery standing calmly at the counter, Sabrina mid-sentence, Beth looking down, Mark sneering in the background. "This isn't just misconduct," Lang said slowly. "It's an operational and reputational threat to the institution." He turned to Sabrina. "You were the acting branch manager during this incident?" Sabrina's voice was barely audible. "Yes, sir. And you failed to recognize the CEO of the bank?" She hesitated, glancing at Beth as if looking for support, but no one moved. She was dressed informally. Rosalind Peters stepped forward. Her voice was razor sharp. "And how many men in polo shirts have you escorted into the VIP rooms without question?" Sabrina had no answer. Greg flipped through several flagged reports. "This branch has had 3 informal complaints in the last quarter from minority clients, all describing vague, cold treatment and hostile tone. Nothing that triggered a formal investigation." He looked up. "Now we know why." Lang looked around the room. "Do any of you wish to speak now, before final action is taken?" Silence. Beth opened her mouth, but young Jenna, spoke first. "I already submitted emails to internal audit," she said quietly, "about internal profiling guidelines. I believe they contributed to today's behavior." Lang nodded. "We've received them, and your courage will be noted." Then he looked at Sabrina, Mark, and Beth. "You'll be escorted upstairs for individual interviews. Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave." Mark objected. "Wait, sir, this is being blown out of—" Lang cut him off with a raised hand. "You escalated a standard withdrawal into a scene. You mocked a client you should have served. And you disrespected someone who built the foundation of your careers." Rosalind added, "You judged a woman by her hoodie, but that woman's signature is on your paychecks." That line landed with such force that several staff members looked visibly shaken. Security entered the branch not in a hurry, but with unmistakable finality. Sabrina, Mark, and Beth were asked to follow. Beth looked back once, toward Jenna, not in anger, but with a face full of quiet regret. Greg turned to the remaining employees. "There will be new protocols, new training, but above all, new expectations." And then, in the final moment before leaving the branch floor, Matthew Lang paused beside Jenna and said, "Thank you for not being silent." The branch doors closed behind them, and what remained wasn't shame, it was accountability. The next morning, under the sharp spring light that gleamed off Union West Bank's headquarters, a podium had been placed on the marble steps. Cameras lined the perimeter, journalists stood in formation, and employees gathered in hushed groups, unsure of what to expect. But everyone waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, Danielle Avery stepped out the front doors, flanked by Jenna Clark and Chairman Lang. Her presence alone hushed the murmurs. She wore a tailored slate gray suit, modest but sharp. No fedora, no hoodie, no disguise. She wasn't here undercover anymore. She was here as herself. Danielle walked to the microphone and looked out, not just at the press, but at the employees watching from the windows above, and at the community members standing behind the barricades. "I did not come here today to deliver a warning," she began, her voice steady. "I came to deliver a promise." She paused. "What happened yesterday in our flagship branch is not an isolated incident. It is not about a single employee or a single moment. It is a symptom of something deeper, a culture of conditional service, where respect is extended only when someone looks like they belong, where dignity is a privilege instead of a right." There were no gasps, no interruptions, just silence, listening. "Let me be clear," Danielle continued. "That culture ends now." She looked directly at the cameras. "This bank was built to serve, not just the polished, not just the powerful, but the everyday, the overlooked, the underestimated. If our systems do not reflect that, then we will rebuild those systems." Behind her, Lang nodded in solemn agreement. Danielle lifted a folder and held it up. "As of this morning, we are launching the Client Equity Initiative, a sweeping internal reform policy that will audit branch behaviors, diversify leadership pathways, and create anonymous reporting channels for staff and clients alike. Every branch will be required to complete culture impact assessments. Every manager will be evaluated not only on profit margins, but on equitable service delivery. She lowered the folder, eyes sharp. And yes, some people will lose their jobs, but better that than lose the integrity of what this bank stands for. Her voice softened, but only slightly. Yesterday, I stood in a lobby where I was not recognized. I was tested, questioned, minimized, but I was not angry for myself. I was angry for every client who never had the chance to speak, for every name the system erased before it could rise. She placed both hands on the podium. This institution will not be defined by how it serves the powerful, but by how it respects the silent. Danielle looked out over the crowd once more. I am not just your CEO, I am your reflection. And if my presence disrupted what you thought leadership looked like, then it was time for disruption. The applause began slow, hesitant, then it grew into something steady, grounded, undeniable. Danielle nodded once, stepped back, and let the new chapter begin. 2 weeks later, something extraordinary happened. At precisely 8:30 in the morning, the doors of Union West Bank's downtown branch reopened under new leadership. The old marble nameplate had not changed, but everything else had. The lobby lighting was softer. The welcome desk had been repositioned to face the entrance directly. And behind the teller counter stood a familiar figure. Nervous, yes, but standing tall. Beth. She wore a new name tag that read, Interim Branch Manager, Beth McKay. Danielle had made the decision personally, not because Beth had gotten everything right, but because she had gotten one thing right when it counted. She had chosen truth over silence. The first customer of the morning was an elderly Hispanic man who spoke limited English. Beth didn't rush. She didn't defer to anyone else. She walked around the counter, shook his hand, and took his request personally, something no one had seen at that branch in years. Meanwhile, upstairs in the training room, a full-day workshop was underway. Jenna, the junior staffer who had exposed the internal memo, now stood at the front, co-facilitating Union West's new Equity in Practice training series. Her materials were raw, honest, and filled with real stories. No more corporate euphemisms, no more hollow slogans, just the truth. Danielle watched all of this unfold from the mezzanine floor, leaning on the railing, unseen. She didn't need recognition. She needed results. Across the city, posters went up in every branch lobby. Respect is not earned, it is guaranteed. Underneath was a hotline and email address, completely anonymous, for clients or employees to report bias or mistreatment. That system, too, had been Danielle's idea. And then came the letter. Printed in the following month's shareholder report, it was signed by Danielle Avery and titled simply, The Cost of Silence. In it, she wrote, The incident that unfolded in our flagship branch was not new. It was simply visible. For too long, institutions have measured success by growth, but ignored the hollow spaces that grow in the absence of trust. A bank cannot be profitable if it forgets who it was built to serve. We are not just correcting behavior, we are correcting culture. And if that costs us the comfort of tradition, then let us be uncomfortable until equity is no longer the exception, but the expectation. The letter went viral. Other CEOs began quoting it. News anchors read excerpts on air. Financial ethics journals cited it as a blueprint for systemic change. Danielle declined all interviews. She said everything she needed to say on paper and in action. A month later, Danielle returned to the same branch one last time. This time, she wore the same beige hoodie and black fedora. Not undercover, just herself. No one asked her to wait. Beth saw her from across the room and greeted her with a smile. Not out of fear, but out of familiarity. Welcome back, Ms. Avery. Danielle grinned. Beth, drop the formality. You're the one running the place now. Beth laughed softly, then glanced at the lobby behind her. It feels different in here now. Danielle nodded slowly. Because it is. She didn't stay long. Just long enough to withdraw a small amount of cash, speak briefly to a few tellers, and shake hands with Jenna, who had come down from the second floor. As she exited into the morning light, a young girl, no older than 12, was holding hands with her mother at the ATM. The girl pointed at Danielle and whispered, Is she someone important? Danielle paused, smiled, and replied, Not important, just someone who didn't stay quiet. And with that, she walked into the crowd, No guards, no entourage, no announcement. Just a leader with a legacy, built not from speeches, but from standing.